Hello, everybody. It's the Kristin Collective here. We are going to try and discuss a little bit about using the language of parts, applying this multi-conscious parts approach that Janina Fisher has so effectively laid out in her book, Healing the Fragmented Selves of Trauma Survivors Overcoming Internal Self-Alienation. It is a book written by and for trauma therapists. And I got my copy around here somewhere. Pookie Bear is sleeping on it, keeping it safe for me. So the thing about this approach, and I'll talk about it a little bit, but I want to start with this. The thing about this approach is it's not just something you can go in, use, and you're done with it. It's a language. It's the language of parts, and it has to be learned like a language. And so if you're learning a new language, do you just go to class once a week, and then when you finish your classes, you know how to use the language, and you're like fluent, and you're set, and you get straight A's in that language for the rest of your life? No. You have to show up every day. You have to do the homework every day for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And then maybe you have like a little dent in like knowing part of the language and being able to apply part of the language on a regular basis, and maybe getting a B in the class or something, right? So it's a gradual process. It's a learning curve. It requires repetition. It requires commitment, dedication, determination. You have to really want it, and it has to become a part of your day-to-day life. Like if you're trying to learn a new language, you're going to learn it a lot more effectively and be able to apply it and not get so frustrated with things if you're using it on a day-to-day basis, not just when it's required, but on a consistent basis, And so the language of parts, it's the exact same thing. And the more consistently you use it, the more powerful it's going to become in terms of the healing it will provide for your life and for the parts of consciousness within your subconscious and consciousness both, whether you have direct access to them right now or not. And so consistency is key. You can't just go in, use it once, and say, okay, I did that. I used the language of parts with this part, and now I'm done forever. You have to continually go back, continually use it. And then you get to the point where you can start to actually build the internal secure attachments that will heal the severe dissociation and all the switches where there's like amnesia and such barriers that parts can't communicate and collaborate and stuff. And that's what really causes the impairment in day-to-day life, And so Janina Fisher's multi-conscious parts approach, it involves re-engaging the prefrontal cortex. It involves going on with normal life self, taking charge of the consciousness as a whole, not in an arrogant, cocky way like, I got this, I'm going to control everyone and make sure to run this. No, it's not a dictatorship. It's a democracy. But there has to be still someone in charge who makes the final say. And so having the going on with normal life self or part step up to that role is paramount. It's absolutely necessary for the healing journey. And it might not happen right away, and that's fine. Please know that it's all a process, but we need to keep these goals in mind and have the intention set specifically early on so that the work we do in the meantime can help lead to these healing discoveries and progress points, right? So the reason that the going on with normal life self has to take charge is because the going on with normal life self has different access to the brain lobes than the trauma-related parts. And so it's important to understand this too, because when we're describing these parts of consciousness, there could be parts who function well in day-to-day life, or at least function better than some other parts, but they're still a trauma part. And so it's very important to not make assumptions in this process. We can make observations, but to fully invest in them as the truth can be really a rough place to go. It's not going to benefit the journey. And so trauma-related part versus going on with normal life self or part. It has to do with whether they're dominantly in the right or left hemispheres of the brain. And it takes a while to separate out which parts are what parts and, how to accurately describe them. But in the beginning, in the early stages, it's safe to assume that all parts you're experiencing are trauma parts. Early on in the work, the going on with normal life self is so blended with all the parts that you don't really know who the going on with normal life self fully is, because it's always he is always blended with parts. And so it's important to not make assumptions, but to continually make observations. And then with these routine observations, we can connect the dots down the road. But it's quite a journey of these daily mindfulness practices that must be applied. And so the going on with normal life self and the trauma-related parts have differences within the brain hemispheres. It's not just what's your role, how do you function, because I have parts that function really well in day-to-day life that are trauma-related parts. And if I had assumed that they were the going on with normal life part and tried to have them take responsibility for the system and try to do the work with using the language of parts to build secure internal attachments, it would not have worked because of the way the brain's lobes are engaged. So it's important to keep that in mind. The going on with normal life self will eventually at some point have to claim full responsibility for the consciousness as a whole and kind of take charge as leader. Again, not in a bossy, demanding way, but in a very humble way and a morals-based way, where you're prioritizing your life choices, including the ways that you direct your own thoughts, but also, external choices of how to invest time and who you're hanging around and stuff like that. Oh man, we keep switching. What was I saying? So take charge, but have like a morals-based way of approaching things, so decisions aren't based on how one feels. And through this, there can be some consistency, because how I act on a day-to-day basis might change, how I perceive on a day-to-day basis might change, how I feel on a day-to-day basis might change, but the direction in which my energetic investments are going are always consistent, because it's all going towards the same goal. So regardless of what parts are present, regardless of what's happening, internal, external circumstances, the goal stays the same. And each part might have their own reason for pursuing this goal, but the goal itself is the same. And so the going on with normal life self takes charge as a leader to help everyone get towards that goal. So there has to be this humility and this willingness to accept and validate and take time with each part and stuff. But the eye is on the prize towards this goal. And there's not this over-investment and over-identifying with the parts. Okay? And so we can, talk more about that later. So trauma-related parts, different parts of the brain, the going on with normal life self will have to take charge. And then in this therapeutic process, it's all about having the going on with normal life self witness the healing of the trauma parts. If you try to work with individual trauma parts, it will not be effective for healing, because there's still the consciousness as a whole is remaining in a state of trauma, and healing cannot happen there. So there has to be a form of regulation before there can be this work that can help heal. And so working with individual trauma parts in therapy, in terms of like the therapist addressing one trauma part, it's not advisable. The goal is to address the going on with normal life part and use the language of parts to facilitate regulation and healing. Okay? So using the language of parts, it involves the going on with normal life self, stepping up, saying, I got this, I'm here, I'm present, I'm choosing to be present with parts. Because the going on with normal life self has been protected from the trauma. And so to confront the aspects of consciousness that exist to cope with trauma can be very disrupting, can be very terrifying, overwhelming, triggering, dysregulating, all sorts of things. So it's a process of working through that bit by bit, piece by piece, and just meeting yourself where you're at, but working towards this goal of connecting with parts. And in that process, you can, my brain just went like 3 different directions with that. One thing you can do is to help your physical posture. I noticed that our child parts have a tendency to turn the shoulders in, want to like kind of hide, right? And then the fight parts have a tendency to slouch, like physical posture, like the back rather than like the shoulder. Like the back is kind of like hunched in. And different things with different things with different parts. But the point is that if you can have some lengthening in your spine and really engage the body to feel like a confident, safe adult, it will help communicate that to the brain, which will help give space and allow for the going on with normal life self to step forward and work on this mindfulness practice towards the goal of achieving dual awareness, where the present moment may objectively be observed while also working on whatever dysregulation is happening internally. And so dual awareness, mindfulness practice, lengthening in the spine, all of this stuff helps have the going on with normal life self be able to use the language of parts to connect with trauma parts to ultimately lead towards building secure internal attachments. So that's a little piece for today. Let me know if you have any questions and we'll move forward from here. Thanks so much for choosing to be a part of the Kristin Chronicles Healing Journey Homeschool.